Now I'm going to go into a third kind of change. These are where you actually need to make a legislative change. So I am now going to take up the cause of something called the Legal Metrology Act of 2009. Now, how many here in this room even know what a legal metrology is? One person, two people, okay, there are a few, about 5-6 people. But for the rest of you, let me tell you what it really is. It's basically laws related to weights, measures, labels, those kinds of things. Now, the laws are in every country in the world obviously has rules on labeling, weights, measures, those kinds of things. So do we, and we have had it for a while. So these laws were updated under the Legal Metrology Act of 2009. And in case any of you have a serious problem with insomnia, let me recommend this. By about the third or fourth page, you should be fast asleep. Now, unfortunately, because nobody reads it, people don't realize that this is the second most used law for rent seeking by government officials. The first is, of course, traffic rules. Now, how does this happen? This happens because, you see, the law is written in a peculiar way in which you can be given a small penalty, a small fine in your first instance, but in your second offense, you could quite easily be sent off to jail for something like 7 years. Okay? So you can imagine what happens. So let me show you the data. So in a typical year, somewhere between 75,000 and 1,25,000 cases are registered under these metrology type rules on the first instance. Many of them are very, very trivial things. Labeling laws are particularly notorious because, instead of G for gram, you have written GM, or the font is wrong or something like that. And very often the entrepreneur will think, okay, I'll just pay 2,000 rupees and get rid of the guy. That is only the beginning of the fun. Because once you have committed the first offense, you are now under the second offense rules. And those rules are draconian. So just see what happens as a result. The number of cases that are booked under this, I told you it's almost 1 lakh cases in the first instance, but only 12, 5, 3. So you can very easily see that, subtract one from the other and you know the number of acts of rent seeking that may have happened. So what does one do about this? In order to do this, you have to actually go and relook the Legal Metrology Act itself. And so in the Jan Vishwas bill, we managed to temper some of these laws. Now, I want to make it clear that you do need these laws. We cannot decriminalize them completely because after all, people do misuse law, weights, measures, labels, etc. But now, this sort of system exists in every country. And in every country, there is a system of layering it. That there is a proportionality in terms of how repeated this is, how big the crime is, and so on. And so, as a result of that, some of these were removed under the Jan Vishwas Bill of 2022, which is now an act. But there is still section 30, 33, and 36, which are quite draconian, but they account for 80% of the cases that are still criminalized. And let me say that I am still in the process of doing something about them, and hopefully I will succeed in them. So this still is in process. Now, I'm going to move on to type 4. Here, we are dealing with situations in process where we need to increase state capacity. Okay? So, the example I'm going to use is that of the Indian patenting system. You all know about the intellectual property rights. It's important, if you want to be a knowledge-based economy, we want to be a Vishwa Guru, we got to fix our intellectual property rights regime. So let me tell you how things used to be till not very long ago, 6-7 years ago. In 2016, look at the number of filings and grants by India. We used to not even grant 10,000 patents a year. In the same year, China granted 4 lakh patents and the US granted 3 lakh patents. Now, one can argue about the quality of China's patents because it also includes something called utility patents, which are low quality patents, but nevertheless, I'm just giving you a sense of the scale of things. So if this is the scale of difference, it's clear that we are not going to be able to play this game. So what was the problem? The problem was, there were many problems, but among the many problems that there was that the process, the number of rules and the steps we had to take were absolutely onerous. And after all of you have gone through all of them, the process allowed somebody to oppose your patent at the very last step. And you have to go back to square one. It's like snakes and ladders, which incidentally is also an Indian game, possibly inspired by a patenting system. And so we had this bizarre situation where there were Indians all over the world patenting things. Many of those patents in America are Indian patenting. I'm not talking about NRIs. They are actually Indians based in India. They were going there to patent. So we began to fix it. And let me show you what happened. So the first thing we did was to smoothen out the processes and steps and the rules and regulations. But a very important part of it was to actually begin to increase the number of people in this space. So we began to recruit. So just to tell you how things used to be, we used to have only some 200, 300 officers in 2016. Those were increased over time to around about, including examiners and controllers. We increased them to about 850 over time by last year. And as a result, you can see first the number of examiners went down. So first we increased the number of examiners. So the first level is examiners and the level went down. But that didn't really solve the problem because they just piled up, as you can see on the other side, with the controller level. So about a year and a half ago, we began to promote many of these examiners up the stream and began to pump in more new examiners. In fact, as we speak, we are hiring 533 examiners. And you can see in the last 2 years, then there has been a sharp decline in the number of pendencies there. So the pendencies in examiner level first fell, dramatic increase in the disposal level pendencies, and now very recently those have also begun to go down. And look at the result of this that has happened. In the very latest year, you can see that in the year 2023, India gave out 1 lakh patents. So in a period of 7 years, we have increased the number of patents granted by 1 to 1 lakh. In fact, the number of patents we are granting is now exceeds the number of filing, so that we are actually now clearing up the backlog as well. In addition to this, there has been another big improvement. A lot of this 1 lakh patents that we are now doing is now homegrown patents. So when we used to do those just 10,000 patents in 2016, something like 60% of those were actually MNCs who were just naturalizing their existing patents in India. Now, the bulk of the patents that we are doing are actually first-time patenting, and they are resident patents. So this is a very big change. So 10 times increase in the number of patents granted, and the bulk of it is now domestic. And it all happened because one is smoothing the process, but importantly, adding to the capacity at a critical place. Now, in case some of you are very bothered about the fiscal implications of adding so many people to the patent office, let me just point out, you actually make money from the patent office because people pay fees. So this is actually a money-making business for the patents and is fiscally positive. So it is equally amazing that people had not thought of it as a revenue stream earlier. Now I'm moving on to type 5, where that was about adding some capacity. Here, this is about removing a state mandated requirement. Now, this may not always be, the state mandated requirement may not always be inside the government. This may be a requirement you have added to the wider system. The example I'm going to give you here is that of mediation. Now, in case those of you don't know what mediation is, it's a legal process that happens pre-litigation. So you get two parties who are going into a dispute, they're going to file a case against each other, but before the case starts off, you bring them together and we try to mediate it so that it can be solved before it goes into the court system. Now, in theory, this is a good idea, by the way, so I'm not against mediation per se, so don't get me wrong. I think it's a good thing, and it's good that it has been given proper legal framework in recent years. However, what happened is that when we introduced this law, and it was 2015, so it's this government that introduced it, we actually made it mandatory for commercial cases. Now, see what happens as a result of this. It meant that every commercial case, before going into court, had to go through a mediation process. Now, you'd think, yeah, let's try and solve it beforehand. But let me show you what the data actually shows. So here is the data from two of the main commercial courts in Mumbai. It's our commercial capital, so this is the best place to get the data for. And this is a relatively new law, so I have got the data for 2020 to 23. As you can see, that a large number of commercial cases are being loaded onto under these. And for the bulk of them, something like 98, 97% of them, this mediation process does not work. It's a complete non-starter in many cases, or it fails. And yet, because it is mandatory, everybody has to go through it. In fact, something like 5-6 months is wasted in this. A lot of legal fees are in fact paid to both the mediator for something is going to fail 97% of the time. And even more fees are paid very often by companies. By the way, ironically, both disputing parties want to get past this. And so they pay more fees to the lawyers in order to find loopholes in this, and there are loopholes in this, to try and get to the starting point of the legal process. So in what should have been a good thing, we have actually randomly added 6 months and attendant legal fees to the legal process by making mediation mandatory. This should not be surprising. You see, you create monopoly for anything, any process, any product, the quality will go down. So essentially what you got here was an ambassador car equivalent of mediation. So my view is mediation is a good thing, but it should earn its place in the system. And it will only earn its place, and mediators will get more efficient only if they provide a good service, which litigants will then find useful. So I am a big believer that this mandatory nature of this should be now removed. And so I am again pushing. This is another live rule that I am trying to push for. As you can see, I'm not very popular with lawyers these days. But I want to make it clear that that this is not the case, that I have a problem with mediation. In fact, for civil cases, mediation law was just passed last year. There also an attempt was made to make it mandatory for all cases, but the parliamentary committee very correctly struck it down, and that it is now voluntary. Otherwise, next time you had a dispute with your neighbor over the garden wall, you would have had to go through 6 months of mediation as well. Now I come to the last type of process reform. This relates to merging, closing, restructuring outdated government agencies. Now, as you may all guess, that every government has large numbers of bodies. Okay? Indian government has some 75 odd ministries and departments. Within that, there are departments. Then within that, there are autonomous bodies. There are all kinds of think tanks. There are all kinds of statutory bodies and regulatory bodies, all kinds of bodies. And many of them have been created at various points in time, which may have been good reasons to have created them, but they become defunct. Or situation changes, better to merge them, and so on. So in recent years, there have been an effort to try and get rid of them. Not an easy task, because as you can imagine, each body ends up having an ecosystem which wants to perpetuate it. This is even true when, in government, nobody gets fired. So sometimes it really puzzles me why anybody would oppose the shutting down department, because all that really happens is these people get taken away and put in some other department. They just get transferred. Yet there's a lot of opposition to this. But despite that, in recent years, we have managed to get rid of the All India Handloom Board, the All India Handicraft Board, the Central Organization for Modernization of Workshops, the Rashtriya Mahila Kosh. Now, I want to make it clear that it's not that we have anything against handlooms and the handicraft board and handicraft as such. The question is, were these bodies serving any purpose or not? And in fact, when we did shut down, for example, the All India Handicraft Board, there were a lot of people in that sort of sector who raised a lot of issues about it and said, why have you shutting this down? This government does not love artisans and so on. So thankfully, the then Minister of Textiles, the Honorable Smriti Iraniji, then just tweeted once that I would like to see the minutes of a meeting of this All India Handicraft Board from the last 16 years. And after that, there was all the grumbling simply disappeared. But let me actually show you how this actually happens. How do these bodies actually emerge, and how sometimes it's difficult to even discover what they do and how it's difficult to shut it down. And I'll give you one example of a body called the Tariff Commission. Now, in order to understand the Tariff Commission, you need to remember that prior to 1991, many commodities used to have their prices fixed by the government. And it used to be fixed by a body called the Bureau of Costs and Pricing, right? Now, BICP, Bureau of Industrial Cost and Pricing. It was a very powerful body. Those of you who may be functioned in business in those days will remember. It used to set the price for different grades of steel, for different grades of aluminium, for cement, and all kinds of other things. And you can imagine a rupee here or there, and these are arbitrary prices. So a rupee here or there could make or break a company or an entire industry. So it was a very, very powerful body, and there were always questions about its functioning. Now 1991 happened, and overnight this body called BICP lost all its power. So it went from being one of the most powerful bodies in the country to having nobody caring about its existence. Now you would think that it would be wound up. Oh no, this doesn't happen in government. So it quietly lived in obscurity for a few years and then renamed itself as the Tariff Commission. Now you would think that, tariffs have to be set. And, so maybe the Tariff Commission had something to do with setting import tariffs. As it turns out, no. Because tariffs, you see, are set up between the Commerce Ministry and the Finance Ministry, the Department of CBITC. So there is no real role for this Tariff Commission, which happens to be in DPIIT, which is not even a part of the conversation. So, but nobody questioned the existence of this Tariff Commission, and it continued to exist till as recently as 2022. And during this entire period, it had a sanctioned strength of 120 people. In reality, it had about 20 people, it had about 80 people. And there are 2 floors in that ugly grey building behind Khan Market. So 80 people were there. People joined it and retired without actually having done any useful work. So I again discovered this somewhere in one of my investigations into rationalization of a particular ministry, and then got into, wrote a note saying that this should be shut down. So the lady who used to run this institution got very annoyed with me. And there were many, and this was during COVID, so there was a series of online meetings held with, the system on when to shut it down. She even went to the extent of complaining about me to the cabinet secretary. But anyway, in the end, it did get shut down. So there is no longer, as of 2022, a tariff commission. And nobody lost their jobs. That, as I told you right at the beginning, they just got redistributed to other ministries. So one of the great mysteries is, why do people resist shutting down something where they all knew they were doing nothing of great value? They're probably in different departments now actually doing something of value. And yet human psychology is such that these things will be carried along for no particular reason unless you actually shut it down. And this is true for many other things. We used to have something called the Children Film Society, for example. Those chaps who made that annoying thing you used to see in Doordarshan. Tare, Hum Chidiya, Ek Chidiya, what was it? That annoying thing. Ek Gilari, yes, that song. But since then, they have actually produced nothing of great value. But yet they were there, in existence till very, very recently. And so now it is also getting merged, it has been merged already with a wider body in the INB ministry. So in this way, step by step, a huge amount of cleaning up of the government is also happening. In this way, I tried to give you, ladies and gentlemen, a flavor of the, quite painful, I would argue in some ways, of doing process reforms. They are nuts and bolts reform. They are not the cool reforms you very often hear about. So step by step, looking at the data, discovering where in the pipeline the blockage is, changing it, step by step, the government is being made more efficient and responsive than before, in the hope that the taxpayers' money that you pay is much better utilized by the government. And step by step, as a result of these efficiency gains, our economy has now begun to grow again. Indeed, as you all know, in the last financial year, we grew up more than 8%. This was somewhat of a surprise, I must admit, even to ourselves. But it is quite an achievement because it is happening at a time when the rest of the world is actually, frankly, not helping us at all. China's high growth years happened under circumstances where the rest of the world's economy was growing and they were exporting. We do not have the benefit of this right now. Maybe at some point we will have happen. But despite that, it is because of these series of these reforms and of course the structural reforms we are also doing. It's not like we are not doing those as well. The combination of this leads to efficiency, economic efficiency gains, which is allowing this economy to grow. But we have to keep doing them. And of course, yes, at some point we too will get lucky. The world will grow again. And once we get the extra kick from services and goods exports growing at those Chinese kinds of levels, I'm sure that time will come too, then we too will be able to grow at maybe 8, 9%, 9, 10% maybe for periods of time. But for now, we are at it, hard at work, and I hope I've been able to convince you that in this way, we are being able to use all kinds of ways in which we are using process reforms to give you an Indian economy that is truly worthy of being a world leader. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.